All right, so today we are diving deep into a world most of us only see on the news. A world of power decisions and, well, shaping a nation, really, the life of a government minister.
A lot of responsibility comes with that title.
Yeah, and I think most people probably picture, I don't know, someone giving a speech or, at some important meeting.
Why? Like, what's the real story?
Exactly, and that's what we're going to unpack today using this RoleCatcher career guide as our guide.
Which is a great resource, by the way. It gets into the nitty-gritty of what it really takes to thrive in that kind of role.
And one thing that stuck out to me right away was RoleCatcher's use of the phrase high level of responsibility to describe this job.
Yeah, and knowing how detailed these guides can be, that's got to be an understatement, right?
I mean, we're talking about people who are making decisions that affect millions, even billions of lives.
Exactly. It's not just about attending fancy dinners and making speeches. It's about navigating complex policy issues, managing huge budgets, and always being prepared for, well, honestly, unexpected crises.
And that brings me to something that I found fascinating in the RoleCatcher guide, the career path they outline. They break it down really well, showing how you can go from an entry-level position all the way up to, the top spot. Kind of like climbing the ranks, gaining experience and responsibility with each step.
It's a pretty fascinating progression, and it
Oh.
really highlights the kind of experience and skills you need to succeed at each level.
So let's break it down.
Yeah.
Where does someone even begin if they're interested in a career like this?
Well, according to RoleCatcher, it often starts at the entry level, and that's where you're really getting a crash course in how government works.
So it's a lot of behind-the-scenes learning.
Exactly. They give an example of, let me see, oh yeah, a recent grad with a political science degree who's super passionate about public service. They might start by working on policy briefs, attending meetings with higher-ups, basically just becoming a sponge, absorbing information, and trying to understand the lay of the land.
So not exactly glamorous, but probably invaluable experience for someone who wants to climb that ladder, right?
Absolutely. And that leads us to the next rung, junior government minister.
Okay, so you've put in your time, you've learned the ropes, now what?
Now the real work begins. This is where you start getting more hands-on experience. You might be put in charge of specific projects, doing research to inform policy decisions, even representing the ministry at certain events.
It's like a stepping stone to a leadership role, right? You're starting to have more influence, more responsibility.
Exactly. And RoleCatcher gives a great example here, too. They talk about a junior minister with a master's in public administration who has a knack for project management. This person is organized, they're efficient, and they're starting to build those relationships that are absolutely crucial in this line of work.
It's all about building that foundation,
Right.
gaining the experience, honing those skills, and proving yourself capable of handling more and more responsibility.
Precisely. And as you continue to excel, you might find yourself on track to becoming a senior government minister.
Now, this is where the stakes get even higher.
Oh, absolutely. At this level, you're not just implementing policies, you're the one coming up with them. You're responsible for the strategic direction of an entire ministry, which means overseeing department heads, managing huge budgets, and basically making sure everything runs smoothly.
I bet you get a lot of late-night phone calls in that job. But seriously, what kind of person thrives in that kind of high-pressure environment?
RoleCatcher describes them as dynamic and visionary leaders. They've got to be able to think several steps ahead, kind of like a chess master, and always be considering the bigger picture.
And just like chess, one wrong move can have huge consequences.
Exactly. Except in this case, we're not talking about losing a game. We're talking about decisions that could impact the lives of millions of people.
And speaking of responsibility, we have to talk about the top spot. Chief Government Minister.
Chief government minister, that is a nice ring to it.
It's the top of the pyramid, that's for sure.
And I imagine getting to that point takes, well, more than just a few years of experience. Oh, absolutely. We're talking about someone with decades of experience, exceptional leadership, and a deep understanding of how government works, like inside and out.
So not only are you setting the strategic direction for an entire ministry, you're also overseeing the implementation of that vision across multiple departments and agencies. Talk about pressure.
It's a huge responsibility, no doubt. And RoleCatcher really drives that home in their description. They talk about how this role requires a unique combination of political savvy, strategic thinking, and this unwavering dedication to public service.
So it's not just about being good at politics, it's about being good at governing.
Exactly. And they give a great example too. Let me see. Okay, yeah. They mentioned someone with an executive master's in public administration, a really distinguished career in government, and a proven track record of managing complex organizations.
So you need to have both the expertise and the experience to even be considered for a position like that.
It's the top job for a reason. But, it's not just about qualifications and experience, is it? I mean, there have to be certain personal attributes, certain intangible qualities that make a minister truly successful.
And RoleCatcher actually gets into this in their FAQ section, which I thought was really interesting.
They highlight some essential soft skills that honestly often get overlooked, but they're absolutely crucial for success in this field, especially at the ministerial level.
Okay, so give us the inside scoop. What are those must-have qualities that we don't always see in the headlines?
Well, right off the bat, they emphasize exceptional leadership, communication, and negotiation skills. And these aren't just buzzwords. They are really the foundation for everything a minister does.
When you think about it, it makes sense, right? You're dealing with so many different people, other ministers, department heads, stakeholders, the public. You have to be able to communicate your vision clearly and persuasively.
It's not just about getting your point across, though. It's also about building consensus, resolving conflicts, and navigating what can often be, let's be honest, some pretty tricky political situations.
Yeah, you have to be adaptable, knowing when to be firm and when to compromise, when to listen and when to lead.
Exactly. And don't forget, every single thing a minister says and does is under scrutiny, right? One misstep, one poorly worded statement can make headlines.
Talk about a high-stakes communication game. You've got to have thick skin for this job.
For sure. But communication is just one piece of the puzzle, right? You also need to have the knowledge to back it up.
So you're not just a smooth talker, you actually know what you're talking about.
Precisely. RoleCatcher is really clear on this point. A deep understanding of government, legislation, how specific policy areas work. It's non-negotiable. They use this example of a minister of finance who doesn't understand budgets. Like, you can't just have opinions. They have to be informed opinions.
You need credibility, and in this line of work, that comes from really understanding the ins and outs of government.
Absolutely. But okay, so you've got the communication skills, the policy expertise. What else? What else does RoleCatcher highlight as being essential for success? What are those other qualities that set a good minister apart?
Yeah, what are we missing here?
Well, this might seem obvious, but it's worth emphasizing, and RoleCatcher does emphasize it, the ability to handle pressure, make tough decisions, and maintain ethical conduct, even when you're under intense scrutiny. This is where those intangible qualities really come into play.
Because it's one thing to make decisions in a vacuum, but it's another thing entirely to do it when you're constantly in the public eye, facing criticism, and dealing with political opponents who are trying to, be political.
That's the job.
Yeah.
RoleCatcher actually reminds us that this is not a career for the faint of heart.
So what? You need to have a thick skin, a strong moral compass, and the ability to stay focused on the big picture, even when things are, well, let's just say a little bit crazy.
You got it. And that ties into another crucial quality, which is adaptability. The political landscape is constantly changing, so you need to be able to adjust your approach, your policies, even your communication style, to navigate those changes effectively.
It's about being flexible, being open to new information, and being willing to admit when you're wrong.
It's not about being right all the time. It's about being able to learn and grow from your experiences, which I think is a good lesson for all of us, no matter what we do.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about these traditional skills and qualities, but we're living in the 21st century where technology is changing everything. And I was fascinated by RoleCatcher's subtle nod to the role of technology, particularly AI, in this field.
It's interesting, right? Like, we don't often think about AI when we think about government, especially those higher levels.
Yeah, is there an algorithm for finding the perfect government minister now?
Not quite, at least not yet. But RoleCatcher does say that AI is being used more and more in the recruitment process, even for government positions.
Really? So how does that work? Is there like an AI recruiter scanning resumes for keywords?
In a way, yeah. RoleCatcher's platform, for example, they use AI to analyze job applications and then score those applications against the specific requirements for that role.
So it's a way to sort of automate that initial screening process.
It can be. And RoleCatcher actually points out that their platform can even provide personalized feedback on your resume. It might suggest things you can improve or highlight to make it stand out to a recruiter.
That's cool. It's like having a digital career coach in your pocket. But I'm guessing AI analyzing resumes is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this technology, right?
Oh, absolutely. They mentioned AI being used for interview prep too. Like, there are features that will actually analyze your responses and even your body language during practice interviews.
Hold on, the AI analyzes your body language. That's
Yeah.
both impressive and a little creepy.
It's the 21st century. But while RoleCatcher doesn't go into detail about how government agencies themselves are using AI for their hiring, it's pretty clear that this technology is becoming more sophisticated in how it assesses candidates.
It really makes you wonder, though, are there certain aspects of a job like this, especially at the ministerial level, that AI just can't assess?
That's a great question, and it leads perfectly into some of the common misconceptions about this role that RoleCatcher addresses in their FAQs.
Okay, so let's bust some myths. What are some of the things that people often get wrong about government ministers?
Well, one of the big ones is the difference between a government minister and a member of parliament. They sound really similar, but RoleCatcher does a really good job of explaining how their roles are actually quite distinct.
I have to admit, I'm not always 100% clear on that myself.
It's easy to get them mixed up. Think about it this way. A member of parliament represents the people, right? They're elected by their constituents to voice their concerns, to debate legislation, and to hold the government accountable.
So they're the voice of the people in Parliament, advocating for their needs and interests.
Exactly. Government ministers, on the other hand, are part of the executive branch, which means they're appointed to lead specific ministries.
So they're the ones responsible for putting those laws and policies into action.
Exactly. Now, it can get a little more complicated because in some systems, a government minister might also be a member of parliament.
Wait, so you could have both roles at the same time?
You could, but even then, those roles come with separate responsibilities. RoleCatcher really emphasizes that a minister is ultimately accountable for how well their ministry performs, how well those policies are implemented. They're the ones who have to answer for any successes or failures.
It's a lot of pressure no matter how you slice it,
It is, which is why RoleCatcher also talks about the limitations on a minister's power.
because they're not all powerful, right? Even though it might seem that way sometimes.
Not at all. They answer to the head of state, the prime minister, and ultimately the people. What really stood out to me in the guide was the emphasis on the framework of law. They might have a lot of decision-making power, but they still have to operate within the boundaries of the Constitution, parliamentary procedures, government regulations. It's a system of checks and balances.
It's a good reminder that no one is above the law, no matter how important their position might be.
Precisely. And that they're ultimately accountable to the people they serve.
Well said. And speaking of accountability and the ethical considerations that come with wielding power, I think it's time we delve into those aspects a little deeper. So we've talked about the power, the responsibility, but now let's talk about the really important part, I think.
The ethical considerations, right?
Exactly, because it's one thing to, make decisions about policies and budgets, but what happens when those decisions have real ethical implications? What does RoleCatcher have to say about how ministers should navigate those gray areas?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. And thankfully, RoleCatcher doesn't shy away from it at all. Throughout the guide, especially in their FAQs, they really emphasize integrity and ethical conduct as being, fundamental for this kind of job. It's not enough to be smart or a good talker or even experienced. You have to have a strong moral compass to deal with the unique challenges that come with having that much power.
Because it's easy to talk about ethics in theory, right? But when you're in the thick of it, facing pressure, maybe even some tempting opportunities, that's when your true character comes out.
Exactly. And RoleCatcher actually highlights honestly, some really thought-provoking situations that a minister might find themselves in. Like situations where there's no easy answer, where every choice has downsides, and where your personal values might clash with, what's politically expedient.
So can you give me an example? Like, what's a situation where a minister might be facing that kind of ethical dilemma?
Okay, so imagine this. You're a minister. You really believe in a specific policy, but it's not popular with the people who voted for you, or it faces pushback from, say, some really powerful lobbyists. What do? Do you stick to your guns, even if it means risking your career? Or do you compromise, even if it means going against some of your values? Those are the kinds of tough choices that RoleCatcher is talking about.
It's that classic dilemma, right? Trying to do what you think is right while also navigating the realities of politics. And it's not always easy to know what the right thing even is.
Exactly. And to make it even more complicated, everything you do is being watched and analyzed and debated in the media, on social media. It takes real integrity to deal with that kind of pressure and stay true to yourself.
You've got to have a really strong sense of self.
For sure. And that brings us back to something that RoleCatcher emphasizes throughout the guide, this idea of public service. Being a minister isn't about, gaining power for yourself. It's about serving the people. It's about remembering that your decisions have real-world consequences for real people.
It's about using your position to make a positive impact, even when it's difficult, even if it means making tough choices that might not be popular. It really makes you think about the kind of people we want as our leaders, doesn't it?
It really does. And it makes you appreciate the weight of that responsibility, the responsibility that comes with holding a position like that.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the world of government ministers. We've covered a lot of ground, from the specific skills you need to those more intangible qualities of leadership, ethics, and public service.
It's been a fascinating conversation, really going beyond the surface to understand what this career path is all about. And I think we can all learn something from that, even if we're not planning to run for office anytime soon.
Absolutely. For those of you listening, we hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on the world of government and the people who navigate it. It's a complex world, but it's a world that affects all of us. And the more informed we are as citizens, the better. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep striving to make a difference no matter where you are in the world.